The latch clicked, and I pushed the front door open, the familiar weight of keys in my hand feeling strangely heavy. It had been 3 long weeks, an eternity spent navigating the sterile corridors and therapy rooms of a rehabilitation facility. The scent of disinfectant and institutional food still clung faintly to my clothes, a jarring contrast to the expected scent of home. A mix of worn upholstery, my favorite lavender candle, and most importantly, the lingering, indefinable scent of my children. But the first thing that hit me wasn't any of that. It was an unnerving quiet. No video game sounds drifting from Ethan's room upstairs. No off-key pop music warbling from Emily's speaker. No sudden thud of feet hitting the floor. No shouts of playful argument. No constant thrum of 12 and 10-year-old energy that was the usual soundtrack to my life. Just the hollow echo of my own footsteps on the polished hardwood floor. I'm Sarah Miller, and I'd been fighting. Fighting my body to remember how to walk, how to move without pain, how to reclaim the strength stolen by a brutal car accident that had left me broken and vulnerable. The physical recovery was immense, a daily battle against stiffness and aching joints. The emotional toll was even heavier, a constant undercurrent of fear and frustration. But getting home, seeing my children, pulling them into a hug, that was the light that had guided me through the darkness, the reason I pushed through the exhaustion and the pain. All I wanted, desperately, was to feel their arms around me, to bury my face in their hair, to feel their solid presence and know that my fractured world could be whole again. Instead, I found my sister-in-law, Veronica Hayes, perched on my living room sofa like a perfectly manicured hawk, scrolling through her tablet. She wore a suit, naturally tailored, expensive, utterly impeccable, a stark contrast to my still shaky frame clad in faded sweatpants and a bulky cardigan. Her hair was a sleek, architectural bob, her makeup flawless. She looked utterly, completely in control. She didn't jump up, didn't rush over with effusive greetings. She simply tilted her head, offering that practiced, serene smile she reserved for making you feel subtly inadequate while simultaneously offering help you never asked for. "Sarah, you're back," she chirped, finally looking up, her eyes cool and assessing as they swept over me, lingering for a fraction too long on my still apparent limp. "A little sooner than anticipated, isn't it? Are you sure you should be out?" The doctors were comfortable with this. My heart, already beating a frantic rhythm from the climb up the front steps, began to pound against my ribs. The unnerving silence of the house suddenly felt ominous, suffocating. "Where are the kids, Veronica?" I asked, my voice tight with sudden fear. "They're at Lisa's, right? David said you were just checking on the house while I was still in rehab. Just making sure everything was all right." She waved a dismissive hand, turning her tablet screen off with a final, decisive tap. "Oh, no, darling, they're not at Lisa's. That was just for the first day or two, while things were arranged. They're settled now, very settled, at Northwood Prep. It's a truly excellent boarding school, highly exclusive, one of the best in the state." Boarding school, Northwood Prep. My mind reeled, struggling to process the words. It was a prestigious, expensive school, miles away from our quiet suburban town. It wasn't even remotely on our radar for middle schoolers. Ethan was only 12, Emily 10. They were children, not teenagers ready for prep school. My vision blurred for a second, the room tilting as if I was back in the sickening spin of the accident. This couldn't be real. "What in God's name are you talking about?" I stammered, leaning against the doorframe for support. "Northwood, why would they be at boarding school? Why aren't they here? Why wasn't I told?" "Well, darling," she said, standing fluidly, smoothing down her immaculate gray dress. "Someone had to make executive decisions while you were unavailable." The way she said unavailable, it wasn't just a description of my physical absence. It was a judgment, a dismissal of my capability, my relevance. It hung in the air, heavy with unspoken criticism. David and I agreed it was for the best, for their stability, given everything. David, my husband, my partner, how could he agree to something like this? To send our children away, without discussing it with me, without even hinting at it. While I was in a hospital bed, then wrestling with physical therapy just to learn how to walk properly again. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. David agreed. My voice was barely a whisper now, raw with disbelief, wounded confusion, and a burgeoning terror that was quickly overriding my physical pain. He sent our children away, to boarding school, Why? Why would he do that? Why didn't he talk to me? There wasn't time, Sarah. Veronica cut in smoothly, her hand reaching out as if to pat my arm. It was a gesture of false comfort, and I instinctively flinched away as if she'd tried to strike me. The sheer audacity of her presence, her calm demeanor while dropping this bomb, was infuriating. Your recovery is paramount. Any stress. David, tell her the doctors advised against any upheaval. Bringing the children home immediately with all the excitement and demands. It wouldn't have been conducive to your healing. And the school recommended it too for the children's adjustment. A clean break, less disruption for everyone involved. Don't you dare use my health to justify this. I snapped, the anger finally breaking through my shock and despair. It burned hot and fierce in my chest, a sudden, potent surge of energy I hadn't felt in weeks. It straightened my spine despite the ache in my leg. You waited until I was in rehab, incapacitated, unable to object, unable to fight for them. You deliberately did this behind my back. You snatched my kids away. Snatch, Veronica laughed, a light tinkling sound that was utterly devoid of humor, utterly cold, utterly condescending. Sarah, please, you're overwrought. It's the medication, perhaps, or simply post-rehab anxiety. You're being dramatic. I've done you a favor. Northwood has excellent counselors. They recommended a brief adjustment period. No calls, no visits for the first month. It helps the students integrate fully, less disruption. A month without seeing Ethan and Emily. My babies, 12 and 10 years old, suddenly shipped off to an unfamiliar school, miles away, unable to contact me, unable for me to contact them. The silence in the house suddenly felt deafening, mocking. The walls seemed to press in on me, the air growing thin. This wasn't a favor. It was a punishment. It was cruel. Get out, I said, my voice low and trembling, vibrating with suppressed fury and the force of holding back a sob. Excuse me, Veronica's serene smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Get out of my house, Veronica. Now. I took a step towards her, my still healing leg protesting with a jolt of pain, but I didn't care. I just needed her out of my sight, out of the air I was trying to breathe. Her composure, her smugness, was unbearable. She picked up her tablet and her designer handbag, her movements sharp with irritation at my refusal to crumble appropriately. I'll leave you to calm down. You're clearly not thinking straight. We can discuss this when you're more rational, when you can appreciate what's been done for you. There's nothing to discuss, I shouted, my voice cracking. You betrayed me. You betrayed my children. You went behind my back and sent them away when I was at my weakest. She paused at the door, that insufferable smile back in place, though her eyes were cold chips of ice, reflecting nothing but her own agenda. You'll thank me later, Sarah. This is for the best, for everyone. As soon as she swept out, the door clicking shut behind her with a soft, final sound, I sank onto the couch, my legs giving out, the weight of it all crushing me. The silence was back, heavier this time, pressing down on me, filled with the ghosts of laughter and the aching absence of two bright lights. Physical pain flared in my leg, my back, my neck, but it was dull compared to the sharp, visceral agony in my chest. How could David let this happen? How could he think this was okay? How could he prioritize Veronica's executive decisions over my right as a mother? I fumbled for my phone again, pulling up photos from my camera roll, Ethan's gap-toothed grin after hitting a home run, Emily's serious face concentrating on a drawing, a family selfie from our last beach trip, all of us squeezed together, laughing. They looked so happy, so secure. Now they were, where? At Northwood, with strangers, because Veronica and David decided I was too unavailable. I called Lisa, my oldest friend, my anchor in the chaos of life. The moment she heard my voice, tight with unshed tears, choked with despair, she knew something was terribly wrong. Sarah, what is it? What's happened? Are you okay? Lisa, I choked out, the dam finally breaking, tears streaming down my face. She took them. Veronica took the kids. They're gone. Whoa, slow down, deep breaths, Sarah. What are you talking about? Where are they? Boarding school, I sobbed. Northwood Prep. Veronica was here. She said David agreed, while I was in rehab. They sent them away. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then Lisa's voice, low and fierce. She did what? That snake. I'm coming over now, don't move. Lisa arrived within 20 minutes, a whirlwind of concern and righteous indignation. She found me still on the couch, buried under a throw blanket, staring blankly at a photo of Ethan's last baseball game, Emily cheering in the background, a lifetime ago. Lisa sat beside me, pulling me into a hug, letting me cry until the first wave of raw grief subsided. She gently took the photo from my trembling hand, her face grim. "Okay, Sarah," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Start talking from the beginning, every single detail." I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a rush, the endless weeks of physical pain in rehab, the mental struggle, the anticipation of coming home, walking into the house, finding Veronica here. The shock of Northwood, the chilling, inhumane, no contact, rule for the first month, David's passive complicity, his weak, pathetic excuses on the phone. Lisa listened intently, her initial sympathy quickly replaced by a quiet fury that hardened her features. She knew Veronica. She knew her history of subtle manipulation, of always needing to be in control, of positioning herself as the indispensable problem solver, especially in David's life since their parents had passed away. "Veronica Hayes," Lisa finally said, shaking her head in disgust. "Always the supportive sister-in-law, always managing things, fixing everything, whether you asked her to or not. Usually when someone is vulnerable." She paused, a thoughtful frown creasing her brow. "Remember that whole mess with her husband, Mark, about 5 years back? The business consultant scandal? He nearly went down for massive fraud. Lost a ton of other people's money. Mark's failed consulting firm, Hayes Consulting. It had been a huge deal at the time, splashed all over the local news. Millions lost, investors crying foul, accusations of Ponzi schemes and fraudulent dealings. Veronica had somehow, miraculously, smoothed it all over. Mark avoided prison time, the investigation seemed to stall, the headlines faded. But there were always rumors. Whispers of shady deals, money disappearing, and a powerful, unnamed figure who had called in favors, pulled strings, and helped bury the whole thing, making the problem go away discreetly. "What about it?" I asked, trying to see the connection through the fog of my own pain and confusion. Something felt really off about how it all vanished," Lisa mused, rubbing her chin. "Veronica pulled a lot of strings, called in a lot of favors, activated every connection she had to keep Mark out of prison and her own name clean. And I remember hearing, through some contacts I had back then, whispers, that she leveraged an old connection at a prestigious private school to get some of the most vocal, most dangerous investors' kids placed somewhere quiet, somewhere discreet, mid-year. A way to mollify the parents, keep them from pushing for more investigations, make sure they didn't talk to the wrong people." Suddenly, a cold, hard knot formed in my stomach, tightening with a sickening certainty. A prestigious private school connection. A powerful figure who helped bury things. Discreet placements to keep parents from talking. Northwood Prep. A name came to mind, a name that had been mentioned in the periphery of that old scandal, a name that appeared prominently on Northwood's board of trustees, a man known for his wealth, his influence, and his carefully guarded reputation. Arthur Sterling. "Lisa," I said slowly, the pieces clicking into place with terrifying, sickening clarity. It wasn't just random cruelty. It wasn't just Veronica being helpful. This was calculated. I think Veronica didn't just send my kids away because I was in rehab. That was the perfect, convenient excuse. The timing was too perfect. She did this because she saw an opportunity. An opportunity to strengthen her position with someone powerful at Northwood, someone like Arthur Sterling himself. To remind him she has leverage, to collect on an old debt from that scandal where he allegedly helped her. To prove she's still useful, still capable of handling problems for powerful people. Lisa's eyes widened, mirroring the dawning horror I felt. You think she used Ethan and Emily as pawns to manipulate Arthur Sterling, to maintain leverage over him." A chilling, absolute certainty settled over me, cold and sharp like broken glass shards in my gut. Yes, it fits. It fits her pattern of using people, of leveraging situations for her own gain. And if Arthur Sterling helped cover up a financial scandal for Veronica and Mark years ago, something involving, what was it? Hundreds of thousands? Near $1 million? I remember the numbers in the news were hazy, but they were substantial. The figure of missing investor money that was widely reported was around $750,000. Sterling allegedly helped make that problem go away for her and Mark. He won't want that coming out now, especially if it's tied to his prominent position at Northwood, if there's evidence of a pattern of using the school for discreet, questionable placements related to past scandals. My God, Sarah, Lisa breathed, looking shocked. $750,000 vanished. And she potentially used the school to clean up the mess and is now using your kids to remind Sterling of that debt. Right, I said, a plan beginning to form in the chaotic storm of my mind, the shock giving way to a cold, hard resolve. That $750,000 that vanished, that Sterling allegedly helped make disappear. That's the key. He won't want that dragged back into the light. Veronica thought she was putting my kids somewhere I couldn't reach them, somewhere I was too weak, too unavailable to follow. She thought she was brilliant. She didn't realize she put them in the one place where her dirtiest, most dangerous secret, the one tied to Sterling, could be exposed. My mind was racing now, the anger focusing into a laser-like determination. I didn't own the school. I didn't have a direct stake in their vast endowment like in some kind of movie plot. But I had something potentially far more damaging to people like Sterling and the Northwood Board. Knowledge of a past that could ruin reputations, shatter careers, and drag powerful names through the mud of public scandal. This was my leverage. I had to use it. For Ethan, for Emily, for myself. My first step was David. He needed to see Veronica for what she truly was, not the supportive, helpful sister he so readily relied on, the one who always seemed to know best, to have all the answers. I waited until he came home that evening. The house was still quiet, the silence between us thick with tension. He walked in, looking weary, burdened, and pointedly avoiding my gaze. He fumbled with his keys, his movements hesitant. "Sarah, about the kids." He started as he walked in, his voice flat, lacking any of his usual warmth. "Not about the kids, not right now," I interrupted, my voice firm, leaving no room for his usual passive deflection. I was past gentle reasoning. I needed him to understand the depth of Veronica's deceit, the scale of her manipulation, not just of me, but of him, of our family. I held up a file I'd quickly assembled with Lisa's help during the afternoon printouts of old news articles about Mark's failed firm. Screenshots of public records listing Veronica's various business registrations and her board affiliations. Pages from Northwood Prep's website listing Arthur Sterling as a prominent trustee. And notes Lisa had gathered about Sterling's other connections and alleged past dealings. This is about Veronica, and you need to see what she's truly capable of, what she's done to our family, repeatedly, over the years. I laid out the connections as clearly and calmly as I could, ignoring the slight tremor in my hands. The timeline of the Hayes consulting scandal, the widely reported figure of $750,000 in missing funds, the persistent rumors of a cover-up facilitated by powerful figures. I presented the evidence linking Arthur Sterling to both that past event and his prominent position at Northwood. I connected the dots, showing how Veronica's current actions, sending our children away without my knowledge during my vulnerability, mirrored the alleged strategy she used years ago to silence inconvenient people by placing their children discreetly at prestigious schools. She didn't do this just because I was in rehab, David, I said, my voice raw with emotion but laced with steel. That was the perfect, convenient excuse. The timing was too advantageous for her. She did this because she saw an opportunity to strengthen her position, maybe collect on a debt from someone powerful at that school, someone like Arthur Sterling. To prove she's still useful, still capable of handling problems for people like him. It's tied into that old scandal, into the $750,000 that vanished and the people who helped her bury it. Our children are just leverage for her. David sat heavily on the couch, the papers spread out before him like an indictment. He read through them, his brow furrowed, his face growing paler with each page. He mumbled something incoherent about needing a drink, running a hand through his hair. He looked physically ill. She wouldn't, he stammered finally, looking up at me with a flicker of disbelief, still clinging to the idea of his sister as a well-intentioned, if sometimes overbearing, helper. This sounds like a conspiracy theory, Sarah. It's too much. Veronica would never involve the kids in something like this. Does it? I pushed, my voice sharper now, laced with a frustration I couldn't hide. Does it, David? Think back, really think. Remember when she helped us refinance the house about 6 years ago? She recommended a specific brokerage firm, handled all the paperwork. Suddenly, our mortgage payments went up significantly, and she got a substantial finder's fee from that brokerage firm. a fee we later found out was far above industry standard. Remember when she advised you on that can't lose investment 5 years ago, the one tied to one of her consulting clients? The one you lost nearly $30,000 on. The client later turned out to be one of the companies implicated in Mark's scandal. I continued, laying bare the pattern of her help. The way she subtly criticized my parenting choices in front of him, framing herself as the expert. The helpful suggestions that somehow always resulted in her taking more control of our finances, our decisions, or steering them in a direction that benefited her connections. The way she somehow managed to be present for every major family decision, offering unsolicited advice, while conveniently being unavailable for my family events. She systematically isolated him from my side of the family while embedding herself deeper and deeper into ours, becoming his primary confidant and advisor after his parents passed. She manipulates situations, David, I said, my voice softening slightly, trying to reach the man I loved beneath the layers of his sister's influence. And she uses people. She uses her charm, her supposed expertise, her position as your only sibling. And this time, she didn't just manipulate us out of money or decisions. She used our children. She didn't just send them to a boarding school. She placed them specifically at Northwood, knowing its connection to Sterling, knowing she could use their presence there to solidify her own leverage, her own power base over a powerful man. She used Ethan and Emily as pawns in her sick, manipulative game, an extension of her past schemes involving that $750,000 and the cover-up. He finally looked up from the papers, his eyes troubled, a dawning, sickening realization slowly replacing his skepticism. He ran a hand over his face, looking utterly defeated. I didn't see it, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I just thought she was helping. She always said she was just looking out for us, for the kids. She said the local schools weren't good enough, that Northwood would give them the structure they needed, especially now, with everything. Now that I was unavailable, I finished for him, the phrase a bitter, painful taste in my mouth. That was the cover story, David. The perfect window of opportunity she'd probably been looking for. While I was literally broken and trying to heal, unable to intervene, she was executing a plan that seems to have started years ago, tied to her own need for power and control, and linked to that old scandal. She took advantage of my vulnerability and your trust. I sat down opposite him, the ache in my leg a dull throb compared to the deep, tearing ache in my heart from his passive complicity. What do we do? He asked again, his voice small, lost. You stop defending her, I said firmly, looking him straight in the eye, needing him to understand the gravity of his inaction, of his blindness. You stop enabling her. You accept that your sister is not who you thought she was, and you help me expose her. Not just for taking the kids, but for everything she's done. For manipulating you, for using our family, for dragging our children into her web of lies and deceit. You have to choose, David. Your sister and the version of her you want to believe in, or your wife and children and the truth. He looked at me for a long moment, the internal struggle clear on his face. Then, slowly, he nodded. The decision was made. He stood up, walked over to me, and knelt awkwardly beside the couch, taking my hand. Her connections, he stumbled over the words. She's always been so proud of them, so protective of them. Because they're her power, I said. Her currency. And right now, her biggest connection, Sterling, is her weakness because he doesn't want his past exposed. Later that evening, the house was still quiet, but the silence was different. It was a charged silence, filled with the weight of unspoken accusations, past mistakes, and the tentative steps towards a difficult confrontation. David was withdrawn, processing the horrifying reality of his sister's actions and his own blind spot. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but fueled by a cold, hard resolve. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was spam or maybe even Veronica trying to reassert control, but hesitated. Something felt different. A gut feeling, a mother's instinct. I picked it up. Mom? It was Ethan's voice, hushed and small, barely audible over background noise that sounded like distant footsteps and muffled talking. Ethan. Oh my God, Ethan. Baby, is that you? Are you okay? Are you and Emily together? My heart leaped into my throat, a sudden surge of desperate hope and fear. Mom, hi. Yeah, it's me. I'm okay, sort of. I borrowed a friend's phone and hid in the bathroom. Em's not here right now. They put her on a different floor, different dorm section. Girls on one side, boys on the other, I guess. We barely see each other, just at some meals, really. He paused, his voice thick with unshed tears, trying to sound brave but failing. Mom, it's not like they said. It's really strict here. Like really strict and Aunt Veronica came and talked to the counselors. She told them things about you, that you weren't well, that you were not able to take care of us right now, that you needed a lot of time away from us, that we needed to be strong for you by being here, by not bothering you while you got better. My blood ran cold, a deep, chilling anger spreading through me, a physical wave of nausea. She wasn't just controlling the narrative for me, painting me as incapacitated and incapable. She was poisoning it for my children and for the school staff, making them believe I was some kind of invalid parent who had willingly sent them away. "Oh, baby, no," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Listen to me, Ethan. That is not true. I am fine, honey. I am out of rehab. I am home. I am getting stronger every day. And I want you and Emily here with me. I never, ever wanted you to leave. This was not my choice. But the headmaster, Mr. Thompson, he said we're enrolled for the full year, and Aunt Veronica said you agreed. She showed them papers." "She lied, Ethan," I said, my voice hard now, cutting through his confusion, needing him to hear the truth to hold on to it. "I did not agree. I didn't even know about it until today. This was done behind my back. Listen, baby, listen carefully. I am coming to get you both. Soon, I promise you, I will find a way. Hold on for me. Be strong for me, okay?" "Okay, Mom," he whispered, a flicker of hope in his voice. "We'll try. I have to go, someone's coming," he said suddenly, the urgency clear in his voice, followed by a fumbling sound. "Love you, Mom." "I love you too, Ethan. Both of you, just hold on." The line went dead. I sank back against the cushions, tears finally spilling down my face, but they were tears of fury now, hot and sharp, not just sorrow or fear. She had separated my children within the school itself, compounding the trauma. She was feeding them monstrous lies about me. She was truly a monster, a cold, calculating, cruel woman. The next morning, fueled by Ethan's desperate plea and a fierce, protective determination that burned brighter than any residual pain from my accident, I sprang into action. I didn't storm Northwood Prep, not yet. That would be emotional, messy, and easily dismissed. I needed to be strategic. I needed to apply pressure where it would truly hurt Veronica and, more importantly, Arthur Sterling, the man who was her shield and her potential vulnerability. I contacted the reporter who had originally covered Mark's consulting scandal years ago. A sharp, tenacious woman named Clara Vance at the city's largest newspaper. Lisa had dug up her contact information, and I knew Clara was known for her persistence. "Miss Vance," I said when I finally reached her direct line, my voice calm and measured despite the turmoil churning inside me. I needed to sound credible, serious. "My name is Sarah Miller. I believe I have new, highly relevant information regarding the Old Hayes consulting scandal from about 5 years ago, particularly the connection to Arthur Sterling and, potentially, Northwood Prep Academy." Clara was cautious on the phone, as any good investigative journalist should be, especially when dealing with allegations involving prominent figures. She listened intently, her initial skepticism evident in her clipped questions, but her interest was clearly piqued as I laid out the initial details. I didn't give her everything immediately, just enough to establish credibility and confirm I wasn't a crank call or a disgruntled relative with vague, unsubstantiated accusations. I shared the timeline of the original scandal, the widely reported but never proven link to Arthur Sterling, and the highly suspicious, abrupt circumstances of my children's enrollment at Northwood after my recent accident, directly implying that Veronica's actions were a deliberate move tied to leveraging her relationship with Sterling, perhaps collecting on an old favor related to the $750,000 that vanished from Mark's firm. "You're alleging your sister-in-law used your children's placement at a prestigious boarding school as leverage against a powerful board member, potentially tied to a past financial scandal?" Clara summarized, her tone sharp and focused now. "That is precisely what I believe," I confirmed. "It fits a pattern of her behavior, her need for control, her history of benefiting from questionable dealings. and her actions immediately after enrolling my children, spreading false narratives about my health to the school and even to my children, further suggest her motives were not benign concern. "This is serious, if true, Mrs. Miller," Clara said, her voice losing some of its initial reserve, replaced by a note of professional interest. "Sterling is a well-regarded figure in the city's elite, powerful, but the old Hayes case was never fully resolved. There were always whispers of influential people involved, loose ends that were quickly tied up. I have documents," I stated. "Email trails, financial records I've managed to piece together showing connections and timing, public records linking businesses, and notes Lisa, a friend who remembers the scandal well, helped me compile. And I have a very personal, very painful connection. My children are currently at Northwood under highly questionable circumstances orchestrated by Veronica, likely on Sterling's behalf, as part of some ongoing arrangement or to settle an old score related to that scandal. Veronica herself admitted to the school that I was incapacitated and unable to care for them. A narrative I believe was carefully crafted to justify their abrupt placement and the no-contact policy, making it look like a necessary measure for fragile children and a fragile mother. Clara agreed to look into it. She asked for copies of the documents, detailed information about my accident and recovery timeline, the specifics of the enrollment process as Veronica described it, and anything I knew about Veronica's business practices or connections since Mark's scandal. This was my new strategy. Use the imminent threat of public exposure. A scandal far worse for people like Sterling and the board of Northwood than a mere family custody dispute, to force the school's hand and expose Veronica's manipulation on a larger stage. The press is a powerful lever, one Veronica, who valued reputation above all else, would surely understand and fear. Next, I contacted Mark Hayes. It was difficult, awkward. David had told me he seemed genuinely blindsided by the extent of Veronica's recent actions, though he admitted she still handled most of their joint finances and all their high-level connections. I found him at his office, a much smaller, less pretentious place than the one his old firm had occupied in the financial district. He looked tired, worn down, the bravado he used to possess long gone. "Sarah," he said, surprised, even startled to see me walk in. "You're out. How are you feeling?" David said. "I'm here, Mark," I said, my voice leaving no room for pleasantries or small talk. I needed him to understand the gravity of the situation, his own potential jeopardy. "And we need to talk. About Veronica, about Northwood Prep, and about the kids." He paled visibly as I sat down opposite him and laid out the same documents I'd shown David, adding the notes about Clara Vance's investigation. I highlighted the connections I'd found, the timeline of the scandal, the missing $750,000, and how Veronica's current maneuvering, using our children's placement at Northwood, was directly linked to her past, to the scandal, to Arthur Sterling, and how her actions could easily reignite the old investigation, putting him back in the spotlight and potentially facing the legal repercussions he'd narrowly avoided years ago. "Veronica did what?" he stammered, leafing through the papers, his hands trembling slightly as he saw the connections, the dates, the implied quid pro quo with Sterling, the chilling parallel between the past, discrete placements, and my children's enrollment. She told me this was just about helping you out, Sarah, giving you space to recover after the accident. She said it was a temporary measure, a kindness, a way to give you peace." "She lied, Mark," I said, my voice hard, devoid of sympathy for his self-pity. "She used her own nieces and nephews as pawns in some twisted power game with Arthur Sterling. She leveraged their placement at Northwood to remind him of her influence, of the secrets they share, secrets that could put both of them in serious trouble if they came out now, especially with a major newspaper investigating." I leaned forward slightly. "And if this comes out, Mark, all of it comes out. The $750,000 that vanished, the cover-up, Sterling's alleged role, Veronica's pattern of manipulation. And you, as her partner in the original firm, the face of Hayes Consulting, will be collateral damage. You could still face charges, Mark, for the original fraud or for potentially knowing about subsequent actions tied to it." Mark was visibly shaken, his face a mask of fear and disbelief. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, looking lost and cornered. He started mumbling about how he'd always trusted Veronica, how she handled everything, how he didn't know the details. Ignorance isn't an excuse, Mark, I said sternly. Especially not when it involves using innocent children. You need to decide if you're going to keep protecting Veronica or if you're going to protect yourself and perhaps finally do the right thing. I left him with the documents and Clara Vance's contact information, telling him that if he wanted to talk, truly talk, the reporter was the person to talk to. He didn't offer to help immediately, not in an active sense, but the seed of doubt, the very real fear for himself and his precarious stability, was planted deep. He promised to look into things, which in his world probably meant consulting a lawyer, but that was enough for now. His panic was a useful tool. Days turned into a week. The silence in the house was still difficult, a constant reminder of who was missing, but it was less heavy. It was punctuated by hopeful conversations with Lisa, who was doing her own digging on the periphery, and the quiet, contrite presence of David, who was now fully, horrifyingly aware of the extent of his sister's manipulation and his own blind eye. He was quiet, observant, clearly struggling with guilt, but he was present and supportive in a way he hadn't been in years. Clara Vance was doing her digging. She called me every few days with updates, her initial skepticism replaced by growing professional excitement and concern. "I found some concerning links, Sarah," she reported one afternoon. "Financial transfers. Small ones relative to the original scandal, but they're there. Around $150,000 rooted through a couple of shell companies tied to Veronica's current business ventures, ending up in accounts linked to educational consulting services that seem questionable. The timing coincides with several recent, unusual enrollments at Northwood and other private schools Sterling has ties to. It looks like a system for laundering money or paying off intermediaries." She continued, her voice serious. "And I've confirmed the unusual enrollment patterns at Northwood around the time of the Hayes scandal years ago. Several kids enrolled mid-year under confidential terms, parents listed with out-of-state addresses, but with clear business ties back to investors in Mark's firm. It wasn't just a rumor, Sarah. Veronica used Northwood before, and it looks like she's using it again. My leverage was real. It wasn't just a hunch. It was backed by documented suspicion, by financial trails, by historical patterns. I instructed Clara to continue her work, to gather every last detail, to have the comprehensive article ready for publication, detailing all the connections. The history of the Hayes consulting scandal, the missing $750,000, Arthur Sterling's alleged involvement in the cover-up, the suspicious pattern of past and present enrollments at Northwood, tied to investors and questionable payments, the recent financial transfers linked to Veronica and Sterling, and the mirroring situation with my children's sudden placement at Northwood after my accident, complete with Veronica's false narrative about my incapacity and the strict no contact rule. I told her to ensure she had solid, irrefutable evidence linking Veronica's actions to Sterling and the school, but I stressed she was to hold off on hitting send. Not yet, not until I gave the word. Armed with Clara's documented findings, the draft article outlining the entire sordid affair, and the desperate plea from my son echoing in my mind, I made my decisive move. I typed a formal, precise, and utterly devastating letter addressed to the entire Northwood Prep Board of Trustees, carbon copying Arthur Sterling and Principal Thompson. I used my full legal name, referencing my identity as an investor's relative from a past scandal, lending an air of insider knowledge that would make them pay attention. The letter pulled no punches. It laid it all bare. I recounted the history of the Hayes consulting scandal, the widely reported figure of $750,000 in missing funds, and Arthur Sterling's alleged pivotal role in the cover-up, presenting it not as accusation, but as known historical context relevant to recent events at their school. I detailed the suspicious pattern of past enrollments at Northwood tied to investors from that scandal, mentioning the discrete nature and timing. I presented the evidence of recent financial transfers, showing around $150,000 moving through channels linking Veronica Hayes to Sterling and suspicious educational consulting fees associated with unusual school placements, implying a continuation of the pattern. I then outlined the specific, disturbing circumstances of my children's enrollment, how Veronica had used my medical recovery as a pretext, how she had fed the school a false, damaging narrative about my inability to care for them, how the imposed, no contact, policy seemed designed not for the children's benefit, but to isolate them and me, preventing me from uncovering the truth. I stated, in no uncertain terms, that I believed Veronica Hayes's actions, particularly the abrupt placement of my children at Northwood and the subsequent actions taken at the school, like separating them, were not driven by genuine concern for their welfare, but were part of an ongoing scheme or designed to collect on an old debt from Arthur Sterling, leveraging her knowledge of his past involvement in the $750,000 scandal. I made it clear I had proof, documented evidence linking her current actions to that past event and to Sterling himself. Crucially, I concluded by stating that I had provided all of this information, along with corroborating documents and evidence, including financial records, witness testimony about Veronica's false statements, and the draft of a detailed investigative report to highly respected investigative journalist Clara Vance at the city's major newspaper, who was preparing a comprehensive report for immediate publication. I demanded the immediate, unconditional release of my children into my custody within 24 hours, the immediate severing of Veronica Hayes's association with Northwood Prep in any capacity, and a full, independent, transparent investigation by the board into her influence on school policies and unusual enrollments, particularly those related to confidential or mid-year placements and the implementation of the no-contact rule. I ended with a clear, unambiguous warning. If these demands were not met fully and swiftly, Miss Vance would be authorized to publish her article, exposing the scandal, the cover-up involving Sterling, the questionable financial ties, and Northwood's potential complicity or oversight to the entire city and beyond. I sent the letter via certified mail to each board member's home address, via email to every listed official Northwood contact, and copied Arthur Sterling and Principal Thompson directly. I wanted to ensure maximum impact and minimum plausible deniability. The clock was ticking. The response was swift, frantic, and exactly what I had anticipated. Less than an hour after the emails were delivered, my phone rang. It was Principal Thompson. His voice, usually measured, authoritative, and somewhat aloof when dealing with parents, was now strained, anxious, and unctuous. "Mrs. Miller, we received your letter," he said, skipping any pleasantries. "It's highly unusual. There seems to have been a significant misunderstanding regarding your children's enrollment and the contact policy. We are reviewing the situation immediately. This is quite alarming information." "It's not a misunderstanding, Principal Thompson," I said, my voice calm and firm, empowered by the knowledge that I held the cards now, that my carefully aimed shot had hit its target. "It's a deliberate manipulation, orchestrated by Veronica Hayes, likely with Mr. Sterling's knowledge, tied to events that predate my children's enrollment. And it's linked to something much larger and far more damaging, as my letter details. Your school's reputation, Mr. Sterling's reputation, are all on the line. This could be a major scandal." "Yes, well, Mr. Sterling has already contacted me," Thompson admitted, his voice tight, betraying his panic. "He's concerned, deeply concerned about the allegations. He assures me he had no direct involvement in the enrollment process itself, merely made a recommendation based on Mrs. Hayes's representation of your situation. He maintains his innocence regarding any past financial matters. However, the information you've presented, particularly regarding past enrollments and Mrs. Hayes's alleged pattern of behavior, is troubling." "Very troubling. Troubling enough to warrant meeting my demands?" I pressed, not letting him off the hook with vague assurances. "I expect my children released into my custody within 24 hours. No conditions, no delays. I expect Veronica Hayes's association with Northwood Prep, in any capacity, formal or informal, to be severed immediately, and her influence on school policies, particularly the no-contact rule and any other unusual enrollment procedures, to be fully and transparently investigated by the board, with findings made public. Otherwise, Miss Vance's article detailing the scandal, the financial links, Sterling's alleged role, and Northwood's involvement goes live. You have until this time tomorrow, Principal. The clock is ticking," He stammered, made more promises, pleading with me not to go to the press immediately, to give the board time to investigate. I told him that was entirely up to him and the board. My terms were clear and my deadline was firm. I ended the call, my hand shaking slightly, but my resolve hard as stone. David, who had been listening intently, looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. "You did it, Sarah. You got their attention." The next morning, precisely 24 hours after sending the letter, I drove to Northwood Prep. David came with me, his face grim but determined, standing by my side. I wasn't invited through the formal channels. I hadn't received a confirmation other than a brief email stating my demands were under urgent review. But I didn't wait for permission. I walked into the imposing main administrative office building and stated my name to the visibly nervous secretary. Principal Thompson met us in a small, sterile waiting room, looking haggard, his face etched with sleepless nights. Arthur Sterling was nowhere in sight, wisely keeping himself out of the immediate line of fire. "Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller," Thompson said, forcing a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. He gestured for us to sit, but I remained standing. "Your children are being brought to the administrative building. We have reevaluated their situation based on the information you provided. Effective immediately, the restrictions on parental contact are lifted, and we agree that given your recovery, a return home is entirely appropriate." He avoided my gaze, focusing on a spot just over my shoulder, clearly uncomfortable. There seems to have been a significant miscommunication regarding the length and necessity of their placement. Mrs. Hayes, her information was apparently incomplete. "Incomplete," I stated, my voice flat. She lied. She manipulated the situation for her own gain, using my medical crisis. And she involved the school and, by implication, Mr. Sterling in her scheme. "The board takes all allegations seriously," Thompson said stiffly, clearly wanting to end the conversation. "We will be conducting a thorough internal review, Mrs. Miller. These matters, the circumstances surrounding this particular enrollment and any other unusual placements, they are not representative of Northwood's values or procedures. Mrs. Hayes's relationship with the school has been terminated." There was no sign of Veronica. No triumphant smirk, no perfectly coiffed hair, no final, condescending remarks. My threat had worked. The potential for a major scandal. Exposing past corruption involving $750,000. Recent questionable financial transfers totaling $150,000 disguised as consulting fees. And present manipulation of families and the school was enough to make powerful people prioritize damage control over protecting Veronica or Sterling's delicate position. Minutes later, Ethan and Emily were there. They walked in slowly at first, escorted by a kind-looking staff member, looking confused and hesitant. Their faces broke open when they saw me standing there, not in a hospital gown, but in normal clothes, tears in my eyes but smiling. They ran into my arms, small bodies colliding with me, clinging to me as if afraid I'd disappear again, their familiar scents filling the sudden void around me. "Mommy, Mommy," Emily sobbed into my shoulder, her small body shaking. "Mom, is it really you? You're here." Ethan's voice was muffled against my other shoulder, his arms tight around my waist. "They said, Aunt Veronica said you didn't want us here anymore, that you needed peace and quiet to get better, and that we were too much trouble." The pain in my chest was physical, sharp, and raw, hearing those monstrous lies repeated by my own children. How could she say that to them? How could she plant such poison, such deep-seated hurt? "Oh, babies, no," I said, holding them as tightly as my still-healing body allowed, ignoring the protests from my muscles and joints. My own tears streamed down my face, mixing with theirs, but they were tears of relief, of love, of fury. "That is not true. I didn't leave you. I never, ever wanted you to leave. This was all a mistake. Aunt Veronica. Aunt Veronica made a terrible, terrible choice, a very bad mistake. She wasn't telling you the truth." I pulled back slightly, looking at their tear-streaked faces, brushing the hair out of their eyes. "But I'm here now. I'm out of rehab. I'm home. And we're going home, all of us, together." Principal Thompson hovered nearby, looking profoundly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly eager for us to leave and for this crisis to be over. "If you require assistance with their belongings, we can arrange for them to be sent later." "We'll take them now," David said, his voice firm, stepping forward to gather the duffel bags the staff member had brought. His face was set, his eyes reflecting the same protective fire that burned in mine. "See that you do, Principal Thompson," I said, pulling my kids closer, my gaze fixed on him, letting him see the steel in my eyes. "And make sure that review is genuinely thorough, because the truth has a way of coming out eventually, one way or another. The public has a right to know about questionable practices, especially at institutions that are trusted with children." Driving away from Northwood, my children safe in the back seat, talking excitedly and nervously about their time there, pointing out things they'd seen, asking questions about home, the weight on my chest finally began to lift. The immediate crisis was averted. My children were home. The battle wasn't entirely over. Veronica would face consequences for her actions, both legal and social, and David, and I had a long, difficult road ahead to repair the trust she had broken and the damage she had inflicted on our family. But we had them back. That was the most important, the most vital thing. Back at the house, filled once more with the sounds of Ethan and Emily's voices, their laughter echoing in the halls, the return of their chaotic energy, the silence was gone. It was replaced by the comforting, sometimes overwhelming, noise of life. David was quieter than usual, observing the children, his face etched with regret and shame. "Sarah, I am so sorry," he said later that evening, after the kids were finally asleep, tucked into their own beds, exhausted from the emotional day. He sat on the edge of the couch, looking lost, the papers about Veronica spread out on the coffee table between us. "I don't know how I let her, how I didn't see it, how I believed her when she said it was for the best, for your recovery, for their stability. I thought I was doing the right thing, the practical thing, while you were so vulnerable. She was so convincing. She made it sound like the only option, like you needed space, like the kids needed structure. I was blind. I trusted her implicitly, and she used that trust against you, against our children, against me. She manipulated you, David," I said, my voice tired, but devoid of the sharp anger I'd felt earlier. The fury towards him had lessened, replaced by a deep-seated weariness and the pressing need to move forward. The anger towards Veronica, however, remained a cold, hard core. "She's a master manipulator. She saw an opportunity in my physical pain and your long-standing trust in her, and she exploited it fully. She used our family, our vulnerability, for her own gain, her own twisted agenda. She used our children as leverage. It's monstrous. I'll make it right, Sarah," he promised, meeting my eyes, the sincerity clear and painful in his gaze. "Whatever it takes, for you, for the kids, for us, we'll get through this, together." It wasn't going to be easy. Veronica's actions had not only physically separated me from my children during a crucial time in my recovery, but had also sown insidious seeds of doubt and fear in their young minds. They had been told their mother didn't want them, that she was incapable. Rebuilding their sense of security, reassuring them that they were deeply loved and fiercely wanted, and rebuilding my marriage would take time, patience, open communication, and a lot of effort. We decided to find a child therapist who could help Ethan and Emily process their confusing and traumatic experience at Northwood and the lies they were told. Lisa came over the next day, bringing comfort, practical help, organizing the house, stocking the fridge, and her unwavering support. We sat in the living room while the kids played loudly in the backyard, the sounds of their laughter and shouting a constant, healing balm, a stark contrast to the silence of the past weeks. "So, what happens now with Veronica?" Lisa asked, her voice serious. "Now," I said, watching Ethan show David a drawing he made at Northwood, a simple picture of our house with stick figures of all of us inside, a poignant, heartbreaking image of what he missed. "We heal. We talk, we rebuild. As for Veronica, she's facing consequences." I had spoken to Clara Vance again after getting the kids back. Clara was pursuing the story, but maybe less about Northwood itself. The school's quick capitulation had reduced the immediate journalistic hook there, and more about Veronica's documented pattern of manipulation, her history of using her connections for questionable gain, and the potential financial improprieties linked to that old scandal and the newer transactions. The pressure from the board was enough to get the kids back, and Northwood will likely try to bury the details internally to protect Sterling and their reputation. But there are still questions about that $150,000 trail Clara found, disguised as consulting fees, and the original $750,000 disappearance from Mark's firm that was never fully explained. Clara believes the documented pattern and the financial links are enough for the authorities to take another, more serious look at Veronica's activities. It might not be the huge, public expose on Northwood, but Veronica will face legal consequences. I heard later, through a network of whispers and discreet calls initiated by Lisa and Clara, that Veronica faced significant consequences, though perhaps not the lengthy prison sentence that a full-blown federal case might have brought in some fictional stories. The renewed scrutiny on the $750,000 scandal and the documented pattern of recent financial transfers totaling around $150,000 and manipulative placements led to formal investigations. She was charged with multiple counts related to financial misconduct and fraud. She lost several key business licenses, faced substantial fines, and her professional reputation was utterly destroyed. The kind of people she relied on for her power and influence quickly distanced themselves from her, seeing her as a liability. Mark, terrified of being dragged back into the spotlight, cooperated with the investigators to some extent, further implicating Veronica. He started attending therapy and began the difficult process of disentangling himself entirely from her influence and his own past mistakes. Arthur Sterling managed to mostly escape public backlash, a testament to his wealth and power in navigating crises, but his association with Veronica and the persistent whispers of his past involvement in covering up the $750,000 disappearance would likely follow him in certain elite circles, a quiet stain on his carefully curated image. It wasn't the dramatic courtroom showdown with a triumphant closing argument that sometimes happens in movies. There wasn't a single, grand moment of public downfall. It was a series of smaller, more realistic consequences that chipped away at Veronica's carefully constructed world. But it was our victory. A quiet, strategic reclaiming of our lives from someone who sought to control them, to use them for her own twisted gain, and who was finally facing the consequences of her own manipulation. Sometimes, the strongest action isn't the loudest fight, the most dramatic confrontation, or the most devastating public expose. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies in the strategic use of truth, quietly applied, to dismantle the lies and manipulations that hold you captive. My kids were home, their laughter filling the house once more. My marriage was on shaky ground, but we were facing it together, taking the first difficult steps toward repair, towards rebuilding the trust that had been fractured. And Veronica Hayes was finally facing the reckoning she deserved, exposed not by my weakness, but by my strength, my persistence, and her own deeply buried, ugly secrets. The quiet in the house was gone, replaced by the beautiful, chaotic, healing sound of a family finding its way back to itself. And that, for now, was enough.